On January 7, 2007, Knoxville, Tennessee. A railroad worker was making his morning inspection rounds on the tracks behind Chipman Street. The air was cold, quiet, just another ordinary Sunday morning in a city about to awaken to its worst nightmare. Then he saw it. A body burned beyond recognition, wrapped in a quilt like a grotesque gift. The hands were tied behind the back with shoelaces. And who was the victim? Who were the killers? You are watching a video on the Shadow Crimes channel, where we recreate true cases, the most mysterious and haunting in history. And as usual, before we get into the main content, don't forget to leave a like and a subscribe for our team. Now, let's begin. This is one of the most shocking and horrifying murders ever to occur in East Tennessee. A case that took the lives of two promising young people and forced their families through 8 criminal trials. These tragic murders shook the community and the families of the 2 victims. We must give a warning. The details of this case may not be suitable for some viewers. According to the investigation, Chris Newsom was raped 1 or 2 hours before his death. In his final moments, he was dragged barefoot to a nearby railroad track. He was shot 3 times in the neck, back, and head. The killers stuffed a sock in his mouth, tied his hands and feet, and covered his head with a sweater pulled tight around his neck with shoelaces. That was Christopher Newsom, 23 years old. He was shot 3 times, raped, and burned alive. But Chris was not the only victim. 3 miles away inside a rented house on Chipman Street, something even worse was happening. A young woman was dying slowly, deliberately. She was tortured for hours, bleach was poured down her throat, her body beaten and broken. Now she was stuffed into a kitchen trash can, wrapped in garbage bags, suffocating little by little in absolute darkness. Her name was Channon Christian. She was 21 years old, a senior college student with everything to live for. 12 hours earlier, she and Chris were just a young couple in love. They had plans. Dinner, a movie, a friend's party, the usual things for a Saturday night. Instead, they were carjacked by 5 predators who saw them as nothing more than toys. What followed was a 48-hour nightmare of torture, rape, and murder so brutal it took 12 years and 8 trials to bring the killers to justice. This is the horrifying truth behind one of the most heinous crimes in America and the 48 hours that destroyed everything we thought we knew about human evil. But before diving into the horrors that happened, you need to know who Channon and Chris really were. Because they were not just victims. They were real people with dreams, ambitions, and futures stolen away. Channon Gail Christian was born April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. When she was 12, her family moved to Tennessee, settling in the quiet suburbs of Knoxville. It was here that Channon blossomed into the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. At Farragut High School, she was not only popular, she was magnetic. Teachers remembered her contagious smile lighting up classrooms. Friends described someone who could walk into any room and immediately brighten it. She had that rare quality of drawing people in, making them feel important. But Channon was not just a pretty face with a kind personality. She was smart, ambitious. By January 2007, she was only weeks away from graduating from the University of Tennessee with a degree in sociology. Channon planned to work with underprivileged communities to help those most in need. Her parents, Gary and Dina Christian, looked at their daughter with pride and awe. This was the young woman who played golf, excelled at school, and still made time to care for everyone around her. Christopher Newsom was born September 21, 1983, a true Knoxville native. At Halls High School, Chris was a baseball star. Not because he was the biggest or strongest, but because he had heart. After high school, Chris stayed close to home, studying carpentry. The crown moldings and woodwork in many Knox County homes still stand as Chris's creations. He took pride in building things that would last. At 23, Chris was building more than just homes. He was building a life with Channon Christian. Friends said they were perfect together. On January 6, 2007, they had plans for dinner, a movie, and then a party. Around 8 p.m., Chris drove to pick her up. Surveillance cameras captured them hugging in the parking lot. But from the shadows, predators were watching. Lamarcus Davidson, Latalvis Cobbins, George Thomas, Eric Boyd, and Vanessa Coleman had decided to hunt that night. Within minutes, both Channon and Chris were held at gunpoint, their hands tied with shoelaces, and forced into the back of Shannon's Toyota 4Runner. A normal night turned into a nightmare. At the rented house at 2316 Chipman Street, Channon and Chris were separated. Chris was raped, forced barefoot to the tracks in the freezing cold, and shot 3 times. His body was then set on fire to destroy evidence. Meanwhile, Channon was held for hours, gang-raped, bleach poured into her mouth to destroy DNA, then finally stuffed into garbage bags and left to slowly suffocate in a kitchen trash can. By Sunday morning, families began to worry when they couldn't reach them. Friends and relatives organized searches. They traced the phone signal and discovered the 4Runner abandoned near Davidson's house. Inside were many suspicious signs, especially a pack of Newport cigarettes. An envelope found inside matched fingerprints to Lamarcus Davidson, who had been out of prison less than 5 months. On January 9, police obtained a search warrant for Davidson's house. Inside was empty, but a horrific scene remained: Shannon's body in a trash can, Davidson and Cobbins's DNA on the victim, the couple's belongings scattered around. Shell casings inside matched bullets that killed Chris. Davidson and his accomplices had fled, and a massive manhunt began with Knoxville police, TBI, and the FBI. Within 4 days, all 5 suspects were in custody. On January 11, 2007, Davidson was captured in an abandoned house on Reynolds Street, along with the .22 caliber handgun, the murder weapon, and Chris's Nike shoes. Cobbins, George Thomas, and Vanessa Coleman were arrested in Kentucky with many of the victims' belongings. Eric Boyd was also arrested for harboring Davidson. The entire group of killers was captured in less than a week, showing the determination of law enforcement and the pressure from the victims' families. After being arrested, the 5 suspects gave statements. But instead of confessing, they blamed each other, trying to escape responsibility. These statements revealed the real motive. It began as a carjacking, then spiraled into a chain of sexual assaults, torture, and murder. Lamarcus Davidson, the ringleader. Davidson insisted he did not rape and tried to blame the others. But his DNA was found on Shannon's body. The .22 caliber handgun recovered where he hid was the weapon that shot Chris. Davidson had admitted to Eric Boyd that he took part in the carjacking, rape, and murders, but later denied it in court. Latalvis Cobbins, Davidson's half-brother. Cobbins claimed Davidson was the rapist, that he was just there. But forensic tests revealed Cobbins's DNA inside Channon. When questioned, he said he felt pressured by his brother, claiming he feared Davidson. This only convinced jurors he was directly involved. George Thomas, the accomplice. Thomas said he slept on the couch and knew nothing. But witnesses and evidence proved he was present, aware, and helped keep Channon captive. Vanessa Coleman, Thomas's girlfriend. Coleman caused outrage when her personal journal was seized. She described her days in Knoxville as an exciting experience, even while Channon was being held captive. She claimed she was forced to stay, but evidence showed she knew what was happening and even helped guard the victim. Eric Boyd, the key link. At first, Boyd was only charged federally for harboring Davidson. He denied involvement in the assaults or murders, saying he only helped Davidson hide. But later, George Thomas testified that Boyd was the one who took Chris to the tracks and pulled the trigger. In 2019, Boyd was finally convicted of murder and sentenced to life plus 90 years. What was their real motive? Prosecutors concluded the initial motive was carjacking, to steal Channon's vehicle for money and transportation. Davidson, newly out of prison, needed cash. But once the couple was abducted, the group turned it into sexual violence, torture, and murder to cover their tracks. The gang rape of Channon and pouring bleach into her body was to erase DNA. Shooting Chris and burning his body was to prevent identification. Stuffing Channon into the trash was to conceal her body. There was no evidence of personal vendetta or racial motive. Both police and the FBI dismissed such rumors. The primary motives: carjacking, sexual violence, and eliminating witnesses. The trials and sentences. This case dragged on for years with multiple trials. 2008 to 2009, initial trials. Davidson sentenced to death. Cobbins to life without parole. Thomas to life. Coleman 53 years, later reduced to 35. Boyd got 18 years for harboring. 2011, scandal. Judge Richard Baumgartner was exposed as a drug addict, causing many convictions to be overturned and retried. Families were devastated to hear the painful details all over again. 2012 to 2013, retrials confirmed the same outcomes: Davidson still on death row, Cobbins and Thomas life sentences, Coleman 35 years, Boyd remained in federal prison. 2019, a turning point. Eric Boyd was finally convicted of murder after Thomas's testimony, receiving life plus 90 years. This case did not end in the courtroom. It left a lasting legacy. In 2014, Governor Bill Haslam signed two laws in the victims' names, the Chris Newsom Act and the Channon Christian Act, closing legal loopholes that had once forced the families to endure repeated retrials. Memorial funds were established: Shannon's golf fund supporting University of Tennessee students, and Chris's baseball fund granting dozens of scholarships to Hall's high school students. 18 years later, their names live on. January 6, 2007 remains Knoxville's darkest wound. But the legacy they left is light. The killers will never be free. The families turned unimaginable loss into strength, into laws, into scholarships fueling dreams for the next generation. In 2025, Davidson continues to appeal his death sentence, but the Christian and Newsom families remain steadfast in seeking justice. Channon and Chris are not only victims. They are symbols of resilience. Their light continues to shine, despite the cruel darkness that tried to extinguish it. From the case of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom, we draw painful but necessary lessons. First, evil can strike anywhere, even in seemingly peaceful communities. Learning self-defense, awareness, and caring for each other is crucial. Second, justice does not come easily. The victims' families had to fight for more than a decade, enduring retrials and even a collapse of trust in the judicial system. Yet their persistence changed Tennessee law, ensuring such injustices would not happen again. And finally, the case reminds us that no matter how brutal evil is, love and memory can become light, a force to protect justice and community. You have just watched one of the most haunting cases in American history. If you have questions, thoughts, or opinions about this case, leave them in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to the Shadow Crimes channel so you won't miss the next episodes, where we will continue to retell true, mysterious, and chilling stories to help us better understand the darkness, and always hold on to the light. Thank you.